The descent of a sticky fluid which came earthward and blazed with heavy smoke is recalled in the oral and written traditions of the inhabitants of both hemispheres. The Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Mayas, narrates, "It was ruin and destruction. The sea was piled up. It was a great inundation. People were drowned in a sticky substance raining from the sky. The face of the earth grew dark, and the gloomy rain endured for days and nights. And then there was a great din of fire above their heads. The entire population of the land was annihilated." The manuscript Quiche perpetuated the picture of the population of Mexico perishing in a downpour of bitumen. Quotes, "There descended from the sky a rain of bitumen and of a sticky substance. The earth was obscured, and it rained day and night. And men ran hither and thither, and were as if seized by madness. They tried to climb to the roofs, and the houses crashed down. They tried to climb the trees, and the trees cast them far away. And when they tried to escape in caves and caverns, these were suddenly closed." A similar account is preserved in the annals of Cuauhtitlán. The age which ended in the rain of fire was called the Qua Tonatiuh, which means the son of fire rain. And far away, in the other hemisphere in Siberia, the Vogels carried down through the centuries and millennia this memory. God sent a sea of fire upon the earth. The cause of the fire they call the firewater. Half a meridian to the south in the East Indies, the Aboriginal tribes relate that in the remote past, Sengel Das, or water of fire, rained from the sky. With very few exceptions, all men died. The eighth plague, as described in the book of Exodus, was Barad meteorites, and fire mingled with the Barad, very grievous, such as there was none like it in all the land of Egypt since it became a nation. There were thunder and Barad, and the fire rained along and upon the ground. The papyrus Ipuwer describes this consuming fire. Gates, columns, and walls are consumed by fire. The sky is in confusion. The papyrus says that this fire almost exterminated mankind. The Midrashim, in a number of texts, state that the naphtha, together with hot stones, poured down upon Egypt. The Egyptians refused to let the Israelites go, and he poured out naphtha over them, burning and blisters. It was a stream of hot naphtha. Naphtha is petroleum in Aramaic and Hebrew. That's a good segue, because that is basically what I want to discuss today. What I want to talk about today is, for some weird reason, all throughout history, we find a situation to where our ancestors describe bitumen, tar, and oil raining down from the sky. Yeah, it sounds crazy, right? Because as everybody knows, oil takes millions and billions of years to form under the Earth's crust and blah, blah, blah. And that's how it happens, right? Bunch of dinosaurs get together, they die, and they get compressed, and then suddenly they turn into oil. Right? We are all used to that explanation for oil and bitumen and all of that stuff, right? So when we hear something like oil raining down from the sky, things get a little weird. Now, the problem we run into is that this is exactly what our ancestors described. This does obviously not line up with what the mainstream believes when it comes to a basic understanding of oil. What I just read also. Oh yeah, and also what I opened up with was a passage from Immanuel Velikovsky's Worlds in Collision. So he actually, I'm not saying he made the discoveries, but he made a lot of really good correlations to where when he was doing comparative mythology, he discovered that cultures all over this planet suffered from a particular time period to where bitumen, oil, tar, etc. rained down on them from the sky. Right, this is not one schizoculture that talks about this, or two schizocultures. We find these cultures all over the planet talking about this. Right, there is this crazy quote-unquote firewater the cultures will describe coming down during a particular catastrophic event. And we're going to talk about that today because this is very weird. And it's something that, check this out. The reason why I want to discuss this is because this really is a very interesting insight into a couple aspects of science and history. Now, I get it. Oil raining down from the sky sounds insane. And if it ever happened, if what our ancestors cataloged is accurate, most people would probably run towards like some kind of a volcanic activity situation or some kind of a geological earthquake situation that might maybe accidentally somehow sprung a well, in the middle of somewhere and sprayed it way up into the sky, and then it rained back down on everybody. That is generally what your average person is going to run towards to try and explain these stories, right? But the stories don't talk about anything like that happening, right? Nobody says that there was this little earthquake and that the oil just, split up out of the ground and then rained down on our village or something stupid like that. Nobody says that. Everybody makes the claim that this oil and tar and bitumen that rains down from the sky literally does just that. It comes down from the sky, from the clouds. It's up there. It's not being ejected from a volcano or something stupid like that. And it's funny, anybody who goes that route, it gets weirder because we have never seen a volcano sit there and eject all kinds of oil. Like that doesn't exist. That's a ridiculous concept. And I only bring it up because I have seen people try to use that explanation to explain what our ancestors were talking about. Absolutely insanity. That's a schizo answer and it's unnecessary. But, the average person has no choice but to bring that to the table as an answer because otherwise there's no other explanation for a mainstream or from a mainstream viewpoint. And this is where things get weird. And this is where our problems are going to come into play. Because right now, our ancestors are asking us to believe them that, oil rained down from the sky and that oil was sometimes on fire. Right? It was firewater. It was literally a liquid of fire raining down on planet Earth. And that's what we would expect, right? Oil is flammable. So if oil was coming through the atmosphere and got heated up enough to ignite, it would be a liquid fire. So from a scientific perspective, what our ancestors are describing is not really weird. In fact, it's completely scientifically accurate. That's exactly what we would expect to happen if oil, for some weird reason, decided to rain down from the sky. Right? That's a strong possibility that it would ignite and create the scene that they all describe. Now, obviously, the main problem is that oil does not rain down from the sky. Right? That's not a problem that you and I generally have day to day. Or it's a problem I think a lot of people wish they had, because then you could just put buckets outside your house and just collect it and then go sell it or whatever. But that doesn't happen. Or does it? Does it happen? So what I want to talk about today is I want to cover certain aspects of this interesting portion of history, and then I want to go over what it means for the modern day researcher. Because we have to ask some really good questions here, and there's some expectations that we should also find if our ancestors are telling us the truth. Did oil actually rain down from the sky? Now, I'm going to say yes, because our ancestors make the claim, and that's the obvious correct answer. But here, let's go through and let's build up a case so that everybody understands how something like this is possible. And of course, on the side of all of this, there is a catastrophic event that we will have to take into consideration as well. But let's start at the beginning. Let's build a case for the possibility of oil raining down from the sky. Now, mainstream science will paint a picture that makes the average person believe that these guys have it all figured out, right? They know exactly where oil comes from, they understand the entire process, and it's an extraordinarily limited resource, so we have to deal with all the politics around it, and the money issues and all of that stuff. Okay. This is the way the mainstream approaches oil, right? It's a locked down, solved problem. And there's two ways that they solve this problem, right? Two major ways. The first way they explain oil is what they call the biogenic model. So the basic idea of the biogenic model is the one that everybody is familiar with, right? We have a situation to where, tons of plant life, animal life, plankton, dinosaurs, tree, whatever, right? Life, ancient life. For some weird reason, gets compressed under dirt and rock, and then over millions of years of pressure and heat, it magically turns into oil. Right? That's the one everybody's familiar with. And nobody really questions this, but you should be questioning it because the way I just described it should, raise a lot of questions, right? The concept is ridiculous. It's stupid. Okay, I'm getting out of myself. Okay, so that's the biogenic model. The abiogenic model is the other explanation that geologists will then run to if you call them out on the biogenic model. And the abiogenic model goes something like this. They essentially will say that oil forms from what they call primordial carbon and hydrogen, whatever the hell that means, deep within the Earth's mantle, or the crust, depending on where they're drilling, I guess, via high-pressure geochemical reactions. Like that is basically the description of what a geologist will give you with respect to the abiogenic model. All right, so there's a problem here, but all those big words make it sound like it's a real scientific solved problem, right? We have primordial carbon and hydrogen, deep in the Earth's mantle, right? And via high pressure, all of this stuff will create oil in the mantle and in the crust, right? This is what they'll tell you. Like, it's an insane concept. All right, so the biogenic model and the abiogenic model of oil, even the general descriptions really should have caused every single human being to look at the geologists and start just choking them out for how stupid of an explanation these things are. All right, okay. But you're probably saying, but there's so much evidence to support these two models. How can you possibly doubt our intelligent scientists who know everything, right? We're supposed to trust the science. Okay. So the biogenic model, let's go over that really quick. So what evidence is there that the biogenic model is accurate? All right, so they'll use things called biomarkers. So they'll go in, they'll take a sample of the oil, and what they'll look for are things like sterines, hopines, and I always forget this one, porphyrines, something like that, all right? And they'll dig into that, and they'll extract those from crude oil, and then they will say, well, since we have these sterines and hopines, and they look like something that we find in life, it must be from life. That's what they do. They say it looks like it. Not that it is, but it looks like it. So it must be. All right? That is the number one thing that they'll point out from a real good scientific perspective. Of course, often they will leave out what I just told you. They will leave out the look like portion. They will simply say, well, there's sterines in here. I mean, obviously, if there's a sterine, that means it has to be from life. And of course, nobody questions them on this because nobody has any idea what the hell they're talking about because it sounds smart, and then psychologically people fall into a stupor and they just nod their heads and they trust the science. Nobody questions anything. But if you go and read what is actually happening, you find out that these things look like it. They are not it. Okay, they are not the biological molecules. They resemble biological molecules. There is a difference, okay? So right there, we could move on. But it gets funnier because they'll use circumstantial evidence as well. What they'll say is since we find all kinds of oil reservoirs within a sedimentary basin that is rich in organic matter, right? Rich in, organic matter, that's fine. We'll stick with that. They say, well, obviously, since there is organic matter around the oil basins or the oil reservoirs, that must be where they come from. Right? And then they say, well, heat and pressure over time somehow converts that to oil, and that's how it happens. And so stop asking me questions. Like that is their explanation. Right? That is basically the biogenic model and the supporting evidence for it. Right? It's insane. It is absolutely insane. It would be like me going to the automotive shop, grabbing a can of oil, and then grabbing a plant off of my shelf, and then putting them in a blender, mixing it up, and then giving it to a scientist, and being like, hey, check it out. I just proved that oil comes from plants because I put these two things next to each other, or I mixed these two things up. So one must equal the other. It's stupid. It's absolutely ridiculous. Like, this is... Okay. Now, the abiogenic model gets weirder. Or not weirder, it gets more scientific because you can actually do a little bit of experimentation to point you in this direction, but you still can't actually prove oil. So what they do is they'll make claims like saying, well, we found hydrocarbons in diamonds that are, greater than 90 feet deep, where there's no biology, by the way. So this is very important to remember, right? Life only goes so far down into the Earth's crust. There is a point, and I forget at what point it is, and I'm not going to look it up, but there's a point to where fossils no longer exist, to where you no longer find life, there's nothing, but you still find oil. All right, so this is why the abiogenic model had to come into play anyways, because they started discovering that oil was really deep in the Earth's crust, like real deep, and the biogenic model just wasn't going to cut it anymore. So they had to magically create something else. So they create the abiogenic model. Another piece of evidence they will claim supports the abiogenic model is they will look over at volcanic vent emissions that are found along mid-Atlantic ridges, or mid-ocean ridges, I should say. They will say, well, we find methane and heavier hydrocarbons coming out of these vents. And of course, these vents must lead, billions of miles under the Earth, which means that there must be some kind of a hydrocarbon system running, which proves that the abiogenic model is real. Right? All circumstantial, right? It's no actual proof. They're just guessing. They're just saying, well, it looks like it, so it must be it. Right? That's what they'll tell us. Right? They also sometimes will find oil in crystalline basement rocks. And of course, there's no fossils in those rocks, but they will find oil, embedded in a crystalline basement. And of course, my favorite, and this will be maybe a good segue into reality, although I want to complain some more probably. But the other thing that scientists ran into, or I should say astronomers ran into, is when they were looking at the moon Titan, right? Titan goes around Saturn. It's a moon of Saturn. They discovered that there was some kind of a methane-ethane situation happening en masse on that moon. And of course, there is no life on that moon. So that really hurts the biogenic model, like big time, right? It always amazes me. The second we discovered what was discovered on Titan, right? The methane-ethane situation. That should have changed everything in geology. Like, geologists quite literally should have stopped in their tracks. They should have thrown away everything they thought they knew about oil and started fresh. Now, of course, they didn't, right? Because they don't have evidence to prove either one, but nobody's challenging them. And of course, now the authority is on their side, so they don't have to throw it away. And of course, they would probably lose their jobs if they did, and blah, blah, blah. So they don't, right? It just stays in the zeitgeist. But all evidence now shows us that the biogenic model and the abiogenic model they're not legitimate. So, for example, if we look at the biogenic model, there's all kinds of problems. But what we find with the biogenic model is we often see that there is oil found in non-biological settings. Right? We often find oil in areas to where life never existed. Right? This is why the biogenic model was created. Actually, I could probably skip all of this and just here's basically the main thing that geologists have no explanation for, and this is the funniest one. Think about this. With all of the drilling that we do, right? And if oil takes millions and billions of years to form, why is it that we do not find oil in mid-transformation? We have never, in the history of drilling, found oil on its way to becoming oil. Right? If it takes 100 million years to create oil out of like a biological mass, let's just say, right? And for whatever magical reason, it gets buried under thousands or tens of thousands of feet of dirt and rock and everything. God knows how that happens, right? But okay, let's say a bunch of biological mass gets buried under thousands, tens of thousands of feet of dirt. Right, so you got your pressure and you get your heat, but we need millions of years. In theory, we should be running into oil reserves halfway through the converting process. I mean, that should be everywhere. Here's the part that geologists never want to talk about. We have never, in the history of drilling, discovered a single oil area that is in the middle of becoming oil. We either find completed oil fields or we don't. There is zero middle ground. This is insanity. That really right there completely proves how ridiculous not only the biogenic model is, but the abiogenic model as well. Because we never discover oil in the middle of becoming oil. Right? We never discover this stuff. We never find all the hydrocarbons being mixed, tens of thousands of feet underneath the ground to magically become oil. We never find this. We never run into this process. We never run into a half field of oil to where you can still kind of discern whatever the biological mass would be as it turns into oil. It just doesn't appear. There's no substance like this. It's either you find oil or you don't find oil. All right, now why am I complaining about this? Why am I giving you this oil lesson? Well, because here's why this is important. We really do have to get rid of what the mainstream says about the creation of oil. Right? We don't know. We don't know where oil comes from. This is a scientific fact. You can go look this up. It's not hidden. You can go right now look up the theory of oil creation, because that is all it is. We do not know where oil comes from. We don't know. We have no freaking idea. So, if we don't know where oil comes from, what that means is that we cannot make any kind of a claim that oil couldn't possibly have rained down from the sky. Now, when I say oil rains down from the sky, by the way, let's take this to the next logical conclusion. I don't mean that oil is raining down from the sky like in a thunderstorm or something like that. And our ancestors don't say that either. Our ancestors say that when the gods are fighting in the sky, there is a period of time during the fallout of these battles that fire water, that oil, that bitumen will rain down onto Earth. Now, of course, who are the gods? Well, the gods are planets. We know this now, right? We know that Aphrodite might be the moon. We know that Kronos is Saturn. We know that Venus is a Pallas Athene, etc. Ares is Mars. Whatever you want to relegate the names to. We know this now. These are the real planets. Our ancestors were able to see the planets a lot closer than we see them today. So what this means is we might have another potential way of getting oil to rain down from the sky rather than just some kind of an earthly source. We don't need to have an oil storm on Earth. If we have other planetary bodies up there in the sky, maybe they have oil too. And like I just said, what does Titan have? Titan is full of hydrocarbons. So we know for a scientific fact, it's a fact, that all of these biological chemicals exist in space. Now, we also know for a fact that oil exists in Earth's crust. That's not up for debate. It's there. And interestingly enough, if you go, it's funny, right now oil, I know it's a side note, but right now if you go, oil is said to be this resource that we only have a very little left of. We have to save it or whatever, right? They're trying to pull away from oil. And I'm not against that, by the way. But it's funny, if you go and you look at all the original assessments, scientific geological assessments of oil fields, you will find that people are in shock about how much oil there is. And in fact, the early assessments all very easily state that there is more oil in this planet than there is water. It's very crazy. I think you can go watch, I think it was General Adrian Prouty or something. He actually talks about some of this stuff. Anyway, it's very interesting. I'm not saying that's 100% true because I don't know. I'm not making the claim, but it's very interesting. If you think about oil like this, right? Because, everybody only really thinks about oil relative to gasoline, right? Oh, we got to save oil for gasoline or whatever, blah, blah, blah. The gas prices. Nobody talks about the prices of bitumen, the prices of plastic, right? We're never conserving oil for plastic. We're never worried about running out of plastic. We're never worried about running out of bitumen for roads. We're never worried about all these other petroleum products. Just gas. But this is how easily the public has been controlled. Nobody looks at all the other products that is created from crude oil. And there's never any worry about those products. Like nobody cares. It's only gas. It's hilarious. That is how brainwashed everybody is. Nobody knows any. Okay, I know. Okay. So anyway, back to the space aspect. If our ancestors are going to make a claim that oil is raining down from the sky, it makes sense then that oil may have simply come from space. Now, like I said earlier, we know for a fact that hydrocarbons exist in space. NASA agrees with it. Everybody agrees with it. This isn't even up for debate. It's right there. If Earth itself, for whatever reason, has oil in it, is it possible that Venus, Mars, and other planetary bodies also contain oil? And of course the answer is yes, absolutely. Or other kinds of hydrocarbons just in general. Right? Carbon is the key, by the way. Like, carbon is the key to all of understanding a lot of these catastrophes. It's a crazy situation. Another great example is Halley's Comet. Right now, it is estimated that Halley's Comet has on the order of 10 to the power of 12 tons of hydrocarbons and tar-like organics embedded in its surface. Basically, Halley's Comet is, in theory, flowing with oil. It is flowing with hydrocarbons. Right? If you could mine Halley's Comet, that'd be insane. Right? But nobody really talks about this. Right there, comets have this stuff on them. Not all comets. All comets are going to be, different configurations. Anything can be a comet. All you got to do is be a charged body, right? That's all you need. You could be a comet. I could throw you up there, charge your ass, and we'd see you burn up real quick. But, I could do that. We could do that to you. But isn't that crazy? Even something like Halley's Comet has all these organic compounds on them, has all of this hydrocarbon, literally tar-like organics. It's insane. It's right there. It's not hidden. So when we start to read ancient mythologies that discuss things like tar, oil, bitumen raining down from the sky, suddenly these ancient histories don't sound insane. These ancient histories start to sound like our ancestors actually recorded an event that took place. Now, I said there was a catastrophic aspect to this. Obviously, if you have tar and oil raining down on your city, yes, that's going to be a catastrophe. You don't need anything else to make that a catastrophe. I think that would suck, and I think we could call that a catastrophic event. But like I said, what sets the stage to get us to the point to where we have tar raining down from the sky, to where we have fire water raining down from the sky? What gets us there? What kind of a situation does Earth have to be in to have that happen? Well, like I said earlier, if we have a situation to where Earth is in a different orbit, if all the other planets are in a different orbit, like our ancestors claim, and if we have a situation to where the planetary bodies are interacting with one another because they are closer to one another, and all of these bodies are going to be electrically charged. What that means is that now we have a way for these bodies to interact with one another at a distance without actually physically connecting. So if Earth is charged to one kind of a potential, if Mars has another potential, if Venus has another potential, and they are all within touching distance of one another relative to their magnetic fields, you are going to have electromagnetic interactions. Is it possible that these electromagnetic interactions created the situation to where oil would eventually rain down on Earth? And the basic scientific answer is yes, it's that simple. We really don't have to go any further. Right? But this is where we have to start looking if we're going to understand why our ancestors would make the claim like oil rained down from the sky. Because if we try to stick to terrestrial explanations like the mainstream does, it'll never make sense. And it doesn't to them, right? Like I said earlier, the mainstream, when they look at these mythologies, they either completely ignore them because they're too crazy. Oil raining down from the sky, drowning entire cities. What are you talking about? That's insane. That's too much for a geologist and a historian to imagine because they have nothing to. They don't have the right tools. Right? The mainstream does not have the correct tools, the correct scientific tools to interpret what they're reading. And because they don't have those tools, they ignore it. And the ones that actually try to explain what's going on, what do? Well, they try to make up these weird terrestrial explanations that sound good. Oh, there must have been an eruption of oil and it rained down and that's why that happened. Yeah. And then other geologists who will pay attention will say, yeah, that sounds about right, sure. And then, of course, they can send that event back, thousands of years or tens of thousands of years, depending on, what chronology you want to look at. And then they don't have to deal with anything. They don't have to supply proof. They don't have to do any of that. They can just say, yeah, maybe it's true, but it was a little local event and, you don't have to pay attention to it. Don't look for evidence. Just move on. We've got this all figured out. Stop asking questions. Like that is the approach. That is the way they look at this. But if we look at it from a real scientific perspective, and we look at the situation as it is described by our ancestors, the gods fighting in the sky, the planetary bodies much closer to Earth than they are now. Now we have a whole other landscape to which the stories that are told by cultures all over this planet suddenly start to make sense. If you continue to read Velikovsky, well, here, let's do it. Let me give you a couple more passages, just so you don't think I'm the schizo. All right, so the population of Egypt was pursued with strange rains and hails and showers inexorable, and utterly consumed with fire. For what was most marvelous of all, in the water which quencheth all things, the fire wrought yet more mightily. Right? You can have oil burning on water. And in fact, that's a really bad mixture, right? There's a reason why you don't throw water onto an oil fire. And they're already talking about this back then, right? Why would they even say something like this? Like, why would they make up something like this? They could have made up anything, but they make up a scientifically accurate picture. And yes, I realize that this is from the Exodus, and the Exodus gets weird because that was created in the Middle Ages, and I know, but the story itself is not a Middle Age story. The story of the Exodus itself is co-opted by the people in the Middle Ages who will eventually write the Bible, right? The Exodus story is a story of an event that took place that will be stolen by the scholars of the Middle Ages to create the religious situation and all that. Anyway, the point is that the story, what it's talking about, it is talking about an event that took place. All right. Anyway, okay. Blah, blah, blah. In the register of the plagues of Psalms 105, it is referred to as flaming fire, and in Daniel 7:10 as river of fire or fiery stream. In the Passover Haggadah, it is said that mighty men of Paul and Lud were destroyed with consuming conflagration on the Passover. In the valley of the Euphrates, the Babylonians often referred to the rain of fire vivid in their memory. Now this is the good one. This is the good statement. Check this out. Velikovsky points out, all the countries whose traditions of fire rain I have cited actually have deposits of oil. Mexico, the East Indies, Siberia, Iraq, and Egypt. For a span of time after the combustive fluid poured down, it may as well floated on the surface of the seas, soaked the surface of the ground, and caught fire again and again. Quote, for 7 winters and summers the fire has raged. It has burnt up the earth. Narrate the Vogels of Siberia. If oil fell on the desert of Arabia and on the land of Egypt and burned there, vestiges of conflagration must be found in some of the tombs built before the end of the Middle Kingdom, into which the oil or some of its derivatives might have seeped. We read in the description of the tomb of Antipater or Antipater, vizier of Sesostris I, a pharaoh of the Middle Kingdom, quote, a problem is set us by a conflagration, clearly deliberate, which has raged in the tomb, as many other. The combustible material must not only have been abundant, but of a light nature. For a fierce fire which speedily spent itself seems alone able to account for the fact that tombs so burnt remain absolutely free from blackening, except in the lowest parts. Nor are charred remains found as a rule. The conditions are puzzling. It's very interesting that this problem was already being discussed, hundreds of years ago. I'll be polite and say hundreds of years ago. But it's an interesting issue. People were seeing the vestiges of the cataclysm. Oh, and by the way, I guess I should have said which cataclysm this was. This would be the Venus event cataclysm. It sounds like the Venus event cataclysm is the cataclysm to where we deal with oil raining down from the sky. And to talk about this even further, so I've done a show on this recently, by the way. Okay, remember how I said that carbon was important? Carbon plays a very key role in some of these substances that our ancestors discussed having to deal with. So obviously, first they have to deal with oil, bitumen, tar, all of that stuff raining down from the sky. But once the Venus event's destruction is done and Venus is kind of leaving, for some weird reason, there's another substance, a carbon-based substance, that will rain down on Earth as well, and it will rain down in a substance that our ancestors will call manna, milk and honey, nectar of the gods, etc., etc. And that substance brings life back to Earth. That is what sustains all the survivors, plant and animal life. And this would be a carbon-based substance. Now, I don't know why this happens. I don't know why life gets lucky and manna rains down from the sky after mass destruction. Because if the manna hadn't rained down from the sky, we wouldn't be here. By all accounts, that was basically it for Earth. The Venus event absolutely just slaughtered the planet. Right? The reason why plant and animal life pull out is because of another carbon-based substance. Right? Manna, whatever. Yeah, it's very interesting. So there's some kind of chemical process going on during these events that at least creates the manna, I think, But maybe during these electromagnetic events where the planets are interacting, maybe even oil is being created, right? Maybe that's where some of that stuff can be created. I don't know. It just I don't have an answer for that, but we have an entirely new scientific or an entirely new laboratory to play with once we start looking, at plasma physics and stuff like that. Right? Everything opens up. I don't have, like I said, I don't have good answers for any of this, but this is what our ancestors describe. All right, so our ancestors describe oil. I'm going to say that they're correct that this star oil, quote unquote, because they call it star oil, by the way. I think it's a Zoroastrianism thing. Comes from space. If this is accurate, and if all of this stuff happens during one hell of a catastrophic event, it's a solar system catastrophic event, you could actually push back on me and you could say, all right, fine, but there should still be debris out in space. And I agree. And like I said, we know comets have oil and hydrocarbons on them. So right there's already, I'm already kind of slapping those people around, but you can push further on me. You can then say, all right, fine, that's true. That does exist. But the reality is there probably should be more of it out there flying around. And I agree. Because the debris field that would... Well, okay, actually, now that I think... Okay, there should be more debris. This will be interesting, actually. And Earth really should run into that debris every once in a while, right? If you're going to have all that stuff, all that level of destruction, Earth should still be affected by some of that stuff every once in a while. What I mean by that is this. You would still think there would be little pockets of maybe bitumen or oil out there floating around in space that Earth would just orbit into, right? We'd just go around the sun and eventually we would smack into this stuff. And then in theory, it would rain down on Earth. Now, most of us right now are probably thinking, well, I mean, I don't really have, I have never had oil rain down on me, and I can't remember anybody writing an article about oil raining down on their city recently, and certainly, as far as I'm aware, nobody is filming this with their phones. Right? That's all it's a good argument, and I agree. However, there's a side thing to this. We might not be running into this stuff because the solar system cleaned itself up relatively quickly. Remember, we're dealing with electromagnetism. Electromagnetism is extremely powerful, right? It dwarfs gravity. It's insane. What that means is if electromagnetism is guiding all of the parts, all of the debris, all of the planets, it's going to sort itself out very quickly. And that's exactly what happens, right? The planets that are in their current orbits, they got there relatively fast because it was only a few thousand years ago to where all the planets were in a more chaotic mess. Where they are now is because of electromagnetism, right? So that would go for the debris as well. If you have charged debris, that debris is going to go to wherever it finds electromagnetic equilibrium, right? It's not going to fight it. That's not how it works. It's self-sorting. So, in my opinion, that's one of the reasons why we are not running into all of these ancient debris fields of bitumen and oil. Now, it gets even crazier, though. I started reading a book called... What the hell is this thing called? The Complete Works of Charles Fort. Now, Charles Fort wrote looks like 2 or 3 books or something, to where he actually went out of his way to try and catalog all of the weird stuff that has fallen to Earth in the past few hundred years. Now, he wrote this in the 1800s. All right, so he goes back to like 1500s and stuff like that. What he does is, let me start at the beginning. Charles Fort writes a book called The Book of the Damned. It's a terrible title for this book because it makes sense in the context of what he's talking about, but not really for a lay person just walking by or just hearing the title. What he means by the Book of the Damned is he means events that have taken place or substances that have fallen to Earth that have been damned by mainstream science to receive essentially no scientific scrutiny, right? Like with the oil situation, right? If, when a historian reads about oil raining down from the sky, they would damn it. They don't want to deal with it. They push it aside, or they assume there is some other kind of regular explanation, and they move on. So what this guy did is he went out and wrote a book cataloging all of this stuff that people reported falling down from the sky. And one of the substances that he talks about, where he finds recorded, is things like bitumen, oil, charcoal, right, anthracite. He goes around and he found all these reports of all of this stuff raining down in little areas around the planet here and there over the past few centuries. Let me give you a couple of examples. About 1827, something fell from the sky near Allport, England. It fell luminously with a loud report and scattered in a field. A fragment that was seen by Dr. Smith is described by him as having the appearance of a piece of common wood charcoal. The substance was so uncommonly heavy that it seemed as if it had iron in it, and there was a sprinkling of sulfur. This material is said by Professor Baden-Powell to be totally unlike that of any other meteorite. Greg says that it is like compact charcoal with particles of sulfur and iron pyrites embedded. Now, coal is an interesting topic as well, because coal is found en masse all over the earth, and coal is related to, or can be, or is related to bitumen in the sense that they're carbon-based, right? And there's tons of it on Earth, right? We find huge deposits for some weird reason, but where did all this coal come from? Is it possible that coal also rained down on Earth to create some of these deposits, right? And then was buried after some of these massive cataclysms, especially the Venus event cataclysm, which literally built mountain layers and built mountains overnight and all of that stuff. Okay, anyway, let's keep going. Okay, so he keeps going about stuff that falls from the sky. A resinous substance said to have fallen at Kaba, Hungary, April 15th, 1887. A resinous substance that fell after a fireball at Neuhaus, Bohemia, December 17th, 1824. Fall of July 28th, 1885, at Luchin during a storm of a brownish substance, very friable, carbonaceous matter. When burned, it gave out a resinous odor. Substance that fell February 17th, 18th, 19th, 1841 at Genoa, Italy, said to have been resinous. Said by Argo to have been bituminous matter and sand. Fall, during a thunderstorm, July 1681, near Cape Cod, upon the deck of an English vessel, of a burning bituminous matter. A fall at Christiania, Norway, June 13th, 1822, of bituminous matter. Fall of bituminous matter in Germany, March 8th, 1798. Lockyer says that the substance that fell at the Cape of Good Hope, October 13th, 1838, about 5 cubic feet of it. Substance so soft that it was cuttable with a knife. After being experimented upon, it left a residue, which gave out a very bituminous smell. Anyway, you get the point. So, I agree with anybody who pushes back saying that there should still be stuff out there. Well, apparently there was, and still obviously is. Now, the next question, and it's the obvious question, is why are we not experiencing this today? Well, who can say we're not experiencing it today? I mean, I don't know. There might be reports right now of areas that every once in a while say, hey, something weird fell from the sky. Here it is. The locals took it. And, it's not falling in mass in the sense that it's burying cities like it did back in the day, right? Those days are over. We've also have to contend with the fact that the Venus event is like 2,000-ish or maybe a little more years old. Right, so a lot of this stuff has been cleaned up. This is one of the other things that I don't think a lot of people truly appreciate about studying history, is that a lot of the evidence for events that have taken place, it's just gone now. Right, there's only going to be so much debris that we can ever be affected by here on Earth from the Venus event. There's only so much. And we know for a fact that throughout the past 2,000 years that a lot of this stuff did indeed continue to fall on Earth. And let's be honest, and let's be fair, even today we still have all kinds of stuff falling down onto Earth, right? You know, the mainstream cosmologist just says, oh, it's just, random space debris or whatever. But there's a really good chance that a lot of that debris that we are still getting hit with today is just the debris from that event. Right, that hasn't been fully cleaned up yet. It'll be interesting to look at our solar system in, say, another 1,000 years, and to look and see how much more clean it's probably going to be relative today. Right, so for example, just to exemplify this point, I don't know, I can't talk, I know. Look at our two asteroid belts that we have in our solar system. Right, those are very organized belts of debris. Right? How did they get there? Well, we know how they got there, right? It's the sorting of electromagnetism, right? We have a Birkeland current running through our solar system, right? Electricity is going to sort all of this matter out. That's just the way stuff works. Electricity is self-organizing, and it does it quick. That's why we see those two belts where we see them now. It's entirely possible that the debris that currently exists in those two belts was scattered a lot, all over the place probably, and maybe are even from like the Venus event itself. At least one of them for sure is from the Venus event itself. But look where it's at now. It's in its own little orbit. Right? The Earth is not worried about hitting that. And the reason why is because electricity is organizing everything. We are not going to hit the asteroid belt because we are stuck in an orbit. Just like all of that stuff has been sorted and is now stuck in an orbit as well. All of the debris, all of the oil, the bitumen, the tar, etc., all of that stuff would have been sorted as well. Right? So not only do we have to deal with the fact that there's only so much debris to run into anyways, and we've had several thousand years of debris cleanup now has happened in our solar system, but we also have to remember that a lot of this stuff was sorted as well. This is the reason why Earth is the way it is now. This is actually the reason why humanity is where it is now. It's because right now humanity is not dealing with any kind of catastrophes whatsoever cosmologically. Right? We have nothing going on. Nobody is worried about anything cosmologically right now. We just happen to live in a time frame to where all of this stuff has been sorted out. Right? We live in, you could say, a privileged time frame relative to our ancestors, because our ancestors were constantly worried about planets fighting, right? They were constantly worried about cosmological dangers. Like all of them, everybody. That was the number one fear. And it was a fear because it happened. Right? This is what held humanity back. Right? This is why we are where we are today, and why, 2,000 years ago, they were not where we are at today. It's because 2,000 years ago, they got essentially reset, right? Life was wiped out. It had to restart. This is why they were only able to go so far, and why we are only so far right now. We live in a calmer period of time. Right? So, okay. Earth is still being bombarded. So the next question, at least for the topic of this show, is, are we still being bombarded with hydrocarbons? Right? That's a good question. And I'm running out of time, but the simple answer is yes, and you can go and find papers on this stuff. But what I need to see and what I want to find is we want to find instances to where we can find like large chunks of, say, coal or gallons of oil or whatever raining down from the sky in the modern time periods. Like that is what we need to start looking for. And I have no doubt it's out there somewhere, right? Like I said, everything that falls from the sky is not cataloged. So right now you might be thinking, wow, this is crazy. I'm going to shut this off because he's just reaching now. But no, the reality is, things fall from the sky every day. We know this, right? NASA will tell you all these crazy specs of how bombarded the Earth truly is. You don't even pay attention to it. Right? And if this stuff happens, say, some in remote area of Africa, nobody's there, right? Or it happens in Siberia, or it happens in the ocean, right? Nobody's there to see it. There's just nobody there. So you can't catalog it. But I do agree with people that would say we should still find it here and there happening in populated areas. I don't disagree with that. So the next step would be to see if we haven't found instances of that. And you know what? I guarantee you we have. But the mainstream will just write that off as either a hoax, they'll write it off as just some kind of a natural occurrence, a natural geological process that the locals are just completely misunderstanding. Oh, you know what? That's it. I guarantee you that's it. Yeah, we'll do another show to where we start to hunt this stuff down, because the main reason why I even wanted to talk about this is because these are the kinds of things that prove that these massive catastrophes took place. Right? I don't think that people truly appreciate what it means to say that some kind of global reset happened, right? And right now, our ancestors claim it was a cosmologically driven global reset. So the debris field would be massive, right? The implications of what happened would be insane. We really should still be living with the repercussions of those catastrophes. And we are. Scientifically speaking, we are, right? We can show evidence for all kinds of repercussions. But one of the repercussions that we should probably still be finding evidence for are things like little bits of oil falling down from the sky, right? Or pieces of coal, or bitumen, or tar, or whatever you want to call it. Right, that's the stuff that we should also still be finding. Anyway, so that gets a little weird, because I know that there have been things like this reported. And we're at the end of the show, so I don't want to go... We'll get into that stuff later. But we have to be careful with how these things are reported and how they are explained. Because unfortunately, the explanation is always like right there. Right? It's always immediate, oh, it's a hoax. Or, oh, no, the local just found a piece of coal who they're too stupid to understand that it came from the ground and not the sky, right? It's always going to be something like that. And then 99% of people are going to believe the mainstream explanation because, that's what we've been trained to believe. To make matters even worse, most people are not aware of the possibility of things like tar, oil, bitumen, etc. raining down from the sky, right? It doesn't matter how smart you are. If you don't know how to question something, or if you don't know what you don't know, then you're screwed, right? I mean, that's the whole point of the show, is to point out this stuff so people can start asking them real questions and stop pissing me off, so I don't have to deal with the garbage anymore. They just, jeez, fuck, crap.